Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's CENTA webinar on international careers in teaching. This is part of our Thursday webinar series, which at least some of you are familiar with by now. And it's great to see the overwhelming interest for this particular webinar on international careers. We are fortunate to have today a very esteemed panel with us, and I'm going to introduce each of them in a minute, and you can we'll then have an interaction with all of them. But before that, very quickly, I want to take a minute to speak about the purpose of this webinar. So, as you know, Center for Teacher Accreditation, CENTA, focuses on making teaching a more aspirational career. And among the many different opportunities that we try to create for teachers, we do feel that global mobility is an important aspect of making a profession interesting, meaningful, and a real career. So today's session has been set up mainly with respect to this aspiration, which is how do we create global mobility for Indian teachers who are interested, and through that create much larger motivation in the broader teaching ecosystem in India. So with that, let me introduce our panelists in alphabetical order. So we'll begin with Ms. Deepa Shetty. Deepa is the principal of Bright Riders School in Dubai, one of the prominent school groups in the UAE. And Deepa was formerly principal of Gopi Birla School in Mumbai. So she is actually a great example herself of global mobility. And she is also known for various initiatives that she takes up with respect to teacher professional development and teacher career growth. So Deepa, thank you very much for being with us today.
Welcome to the session. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Linda Rush. Linda is Senior Vice President at TELLAL Institute. She heads the institute, which is an institute focused on teacher education and leadership, teacher education and school leadership, and is part of the GEMS group, a leading education group in the world. Dr. Linda Rush also has worked extensively in education prior to this, particularly with the University of Manchester in UK. So again, very familiar with the global teaching and teacher development landscape, works full-time developing teachers on a wide range of competencies. Thank you very much, Linda, for being here.
Thank you.
Next we have, thank you. Next we have Dr. John Diamond, who has recently retired from Edge Hill University, UK, and was the Dean for Innovation and International Exchange. And again, therefore, extremely relevant for the topic we are discussing today. John also serves on various advisory boards around the world and is actively involved in teacher development in multiple countries. Thank you very much, John, for being here.
Okay.
And finally, we have Mr. Subrat Mohanty. Subrat is the Group President of Manipal Education and Medical Group, which many of you would be aware is a large group in India and with presence in other countries such as UAE, Malaysia, etc., focused on education and healthcare. And Subrat has a long history of being in leadership positions in corporate India, well known in the corporate world in India, and is now heading Manipal Education Management Group. Subrat, thank you very much for being with us today.
The pleasure, Ramya. Thanks.
I also want to mention that partnering with us on this webinar more broadly is also Manipal Group, with whom CENTA is launching a program for teachers mainly targeted at global mobility. And we'll also talk about a little bit about that during the course of this. But let me start with asking all the panelists my first question for the day, and we can, I mean, in no particular order, we can get comments from all of you, which is in international environments, what do schools and school groups look for? What competencies do schools and school groups look for in teachers? And would love to hear from, and maybe actually let me put you on the spot, Linda, as someone who's doing the maximum amount of work on this topic. So maybe we'll start with you. What competencies do schools and school groups look for in an international environment? And would also just request all the panelists who are not speaking to sort of keep muting, unmuting yourself if that's okay, since there's a little bit of background noise. Thank you very much.
Okay, so for me, regardless of wherever you're teaching or wanting to teach, there are universal competencies associated with becoming an outstanding teacher in the classroom. And there's lots of research that's gone into, and it continues to go into, understanding better what those characteristics, capacities, are made up of. And at the TELLAL Institute, the Teaching and Learning Leadership for All, we base all our teacher training, be it in helping somebody to become a teacher or to grow and develop existing teachers, around what we call high leverage teaching practices. And these high leverage teaching practices have been informed by University of Michigan What Works research, and they've come up with around 19 high leverage teaching practices to do with student thinking, meeting student needs, digitally sort of enhance sort of learning, organisation and behaviour management, student-led learning, communication, planning, assessment, all the things that you would imagine. And they break down these high leverage teaching practices into competencies, and we've worked off those. We've concertinaed them down to 8 competencies, or 8 domains with 32 competencies, and there'll be all the ones I'm sure colleagues on the panel will say, oh yes, I can see how that's important in terms of becoming a teacher. So I actually think there are universal competencies about becoming a really, really good practitioner in the classroom. I do, however, think, and I've learned this much more since being in Dubai, where it's almost a microcosm of the world in terms of the range of ethnicity on behalf of teachers and students and parents. And it's a privilege to be working in that context. But what comes out of it for me, and I've worked with many Indian teachers actually, both experienced and wanting to become qualified, is not to underestimate, when you're wanting to engage with an international career, the learning curve in just being steeped in a new culture, the wider culture of, for example, being in the UAE. And then that might also mean that you're putting yourself in a situation where you're not working with the Indian curriculum, but maybe the British curriculum or the American curriculum, and so on. So even before you put your toe in the classroom as a becoming international educator, don't underestimate how you need to embrace the wider context in which you're learning and growing and developing as a professional. And then once you put your foot in the classroom door, there are all those things around growing and developing as a teacher. So alongside the mainstream competencies that I think are required anywhere in terms of being a good teacher, there are the 4 R's, and I'd call them resilience, resourcefulness, reflectiveness, and reciprocity. And these are capacities that alongside you doing your normal, your mainstream teaching job, are qualities that are really, really, they're always needed now in this world, this complex, unpredictable world. But if you're putting yourself into a situation, a context which is more unfamiliar, you need these 4 R's in bucketfuls, and you need to grow them and you need them nurtured.
Great. No, thanks, Linda. I think that gives us a great start to work off. And let me just ask you one follow-up question, which is from your experience in other parts of the world and UAE, and I'm specifically asking about UAE because it's clearly one of the geographies of practical interest for Indian teachers. From your experience in UAE, is there anything specific that you see as a competency requirement or difference of any kind that one should be particularly aware of for UAE?
Yeah, I will do, but I'd like to say one thing that I've noticed, which is a real strength of our Indian teachers, is their knowledge of their subject. You know, if they're coming in to teach a particular subject, the subject knowledge on behalf of our Indian practitioners is always rated highly, outstanding, I would say. There are some aspects, though, I think, with respect to teacher training in India, which sometimes means that it's more focused on the abstract and the subject rather than the practice. And so there should be an expectation to grow those aspects of classroom practice more so than what necessarily has been in the case within the homeland. The other thing is around English language proficiency. And of course, a lot of our Indian teachers are very capable in terms of communicating orally and in the written form. But as a classroom teacher, as a developing leader within schools, that facility, which, and let's just, I kind of bow actually in awe of our Indian teachers, because English is not necessarily their second or third, but possibly their fourth or fifth language. So, you know, our Indian teachers are very, very competent. But there is the expectation often within the private school system, which is more likely where our Indian teachers will be ending up, on behalf of parents, that there is this English language proficiency. So over and above some classroom practice, aspects of classroom practice to do with student-led learning or more creative ways of assessing, and obviously within the context we're finding ourselves now, digitally enhanced ways of working and learning. Alongside that, the English language proficiency and self-presentation and how we communicate with parents are very important aspects in my experience.
Wonderful. No, very helpful, Linda. And maybe with that, you know, let me move to John and ask you, John. I mean, I don't know how much you have experienced Indian teachers, you know, compared to say Linda, who's probably working with many of them day in and day out. But irrespective of that, if you were to give us some inputs from a UK standpoint with respect to Indian teachers moving to UK. What do you think are a couple of big things that the school system there would look for, and intuitively, where do you feel the gaps might be?
Okay, thanks, Ramya. First of all, you promoted me, which is very nice, and thank you very much. I was never a dean; I was an associate dean, one level below, but I'll take the promotion and add that to my CV. So thank you.
Beyond a level, it's all the same, John.
If I could take one step back, and then I'll come directly to your question. I think that in a way, as Linda was saying, this conversation, if we were having this conversation 6 months ago, I suspect it would be different because the context would be different. The global context would be different. I think we would be talking about how do we develop and add and enhance our digital learning? How do we prepare our beginning teachers to work in that particular environment? But 6 months on, It's a very different conversation. That's the first thing to say. The second thing to say, I think, is that speaking as someone who's worked in the UK system professionally, I'm well aware of the gaps in it. And I think a huge gap is an understanding of global developments, the world outside the UK, and again, the context we're working in and living in, not just COVID-19, but the uncertainty globally, means that I think teachers who work in the UK, who are trained in the UK, need much more time and attention being paid to understanding the world outside and beyond the shores of the United Kingdom. And one more political thing, and then I'll come to your question. One of the concerns I have as someone who lives here in the UK, and this is where I'm speaking to you from, is the decision that we made a couple of years ago to leave the European Union can be interpreted as a kind of narrowing of our sense of the world and a retreat into ourselves. And I think, without going too far, we're aware of what happens when you become inward looking and see the world outside as a threat and not as a potential partner. So I think that's the context I think we're having this conversation in. In that sense, I think teachers are so important. They always are, they always have been, but in the context of the global world we live in, how we prepare, train, and support and nurture our teachers becomes incredibly important. One of the two things in answer to your question, one of the things which I think we need to prioritise, and I know the work that you do at CENTA is really important in this respect, but there is something about developing relationships, I think, with those UK universities that have an interest in and a commitment to global teacher education. It's not that none of them do, many of them do, but I think it's having those relationships, first of all. And secondly, having relationships with those organisations at a local level that recruit teachers. And part of the difficulty, and it's the consequence of the decision we made to leave the European Union, part of the dilemma I think we all face now is how do we recruit good people from outside the UK? And that issue of recruiting and enhancing the workforce is a real challenge. And I think whilst that's something that obviously we dealt with at a political level, nation to nation, I definitely think there's something quite necessary about the relationships that can be built. And they can be built through direct contact with universities. They can be built through exploring exchanges. They can be built through exploring the exchange of staff, as well as the opportunities for students to visit both ways. And I think that becomes really important. And in the UK, those universities that are involved in teacher education can then act as the institution I used to work in, and there are others that I have direct contacts with and relationships with, can help facilitate conversations with schools and those who employ. But I come back to my main point, which I know wasn't a direct answer to your really, really important question. I think the world is very different from how it was a few months ago, and how we navigate our way through it. And maybe it is through teacher education. Maybe we are part of that community that touches each other regardless of the boundaries and borders that separate us at a national level.
No, I think that's very very interesting, John. And in fact, I would say that's a great affirmation of the direction we are taking as CENTA. And I'm also seeing a couple of the questions. I think someone called Vaishali has actually asked the question a couple of times about what are some of the platforms through which one can get international mobility. And Vaishali do want to mention that My CENTA, which is our teachers platform, specifically focuses on teacher careers, including international mobility. And as John said, I think the relationships with both universities in UK, and you're aware that we have another partnership with Buckingham University in a different context, as well as with some of the recruiting organizations, etc., will play a very important role here. So glad to get that affirmation, John. Sorry, somebody has asked, how do we apply for My CENTA? There is no application. You can just join My CENTA on what is called m.centa.org from your mobile browser. So there's no application. I mean, it's just a platform that any teacher can join, and you can apply for a specific job that might be listed over there. So let me move to, and we'll take on some of the other questions as we go along, but let me move to Deepa as someone who has made the transition from India to UAE. And I'm going to ask you a slightly different question, or rather a question in two parts. What competencies do you feel you were selected for? Why were you made the principal of Bright Riders School? And please don't be modest. So I think it'll be very valuable for people to know what made you get selected. And another somewhat related but different question: what are some of the challenges that you feel an Indian teacher faces in an international environment like this? And particularly younger teachers who might be taking up a first or second job internationally.
Okay, good evening, everyone. And the first question, I think it would be the right time and the right place, because for me, the time I took the decision to move or was actively looking for a change from my earlier position as principal of a CBSE school in Mumbai. I think this just came along and I did the transition. Suffice to say that I think I was not prepared for what I was in for, because there's not a lot of information out there about what UAE is about, though there are many Indians over here and Indian teachers, etc. But yet, as moving from a head position to a head position, there have been a lot of challenges. But in terms of competencies, I think what they're looking at, apart from the professional what should I say, qualifications that you have, they're looking at somebody who is open-minded about learning, understands the cultural context of UAE vis-a-vis India, and is not coming with a lot of, for want of a better word, baggage from India. So you need to learn to be very quickly unlearn what you have taken for granted in a country like India, and you need to pitch in right there and put on your running shoes and start running over here. So I think in terms of the soft skill competencies, there's a lot of requirement in terms of understanding the cultural context, in terms of also understanding the norms that are there or the structure that is already there in UAE. There's a lot of MOE or the government related norms that are there in education over here. So there is a proper framework and a structure, which of course is there in India also. But what happens in India is because of our vast diversity. And there's a lot of customization to systems and frameworks. So Maharashtra will be very different from a Karnataka, will be very different from Delhi, etc.
Yeah.
I will not use the other word. I'm just tempted to use a Hindi word for it. But yeah, so here the beauty of it is, I think one of the most important things as teachers who come from India over here is there's a structure and there's a system. And it's like a safety net. You can't go wrong. You have like a kind of safety net where that you have to follow these kind of norms, and there's a lot of room for innovation and for creativity within that structure. So it hits you on both levels, where that if you go wrong also there's somebody to correct you, because there's a norm and you're expected to follow it. But at the same time, it allows you a lot of creativity and innovative practices, etc. So I think for teachers who are moving from India, especially young teachers, one is get your basic, I agree with Linda on the fact that we as Indians, we do a lot of content learning in our schools and colleges. a lot of our time has been studying content about the subjects that we have graduated in. So when it comes to content, there's a lot of, what should I say, most Indian teachers would do a good job in terms of content or subject knowledge. But what we basically lack, or what should I say, there's a gap, is having practices that will lead to innovative teaching learning, and also reflecting on those practices. One of the things that we rarely do in India is reflection on what we have already done. We are always concerned about planning for the future and implementation, but we rarely see that if we have planned something and we have implemented it, what is the impact of that in terms of student learning or student progress or attainment. And I think that's one thing the teachers, even when they are in India, can start on, is reflection on their own practices. And that helps a lot when they come to a place like UAE, because that's one of the things that everybody talks about and everybody needs to do. So I think these core competencies, in terms of, apart from the ones which Linda just mentioned, I think is important for teachers to get on board very, very quickly, rather than waste a lot of time going back and forth or learning or unlearning, etc. So they can get on board very easily as soon as they get into a job over here.
Sure. And and if I were to push you a bit on the challenges, right? So what can go wrong? What should I be afraid about as an Indian teacher applying for an international job?
In what context are you asking me that? Are you asking from
any context? It could be personal, professional, but in the sense, in general, what are some of the things you have seen people practically struggle with? Because we are trying to make this webinar as practical as possible for the people who truly want an international career. So it's not meant to be a general discussion on international careers, but for someone who's considering an international career, what should I think about? So what are a couple of challenges in that context?
So I think adding to what Linda said about communication, communication in English, especially, and not only communication verbally, but also expressing oneself through your documentation, etc., is an extremely important skill. And knowing where they come from, in terms of people who come from metro cities or have had access to good education or good schools back in India, and are competent enough to take on that, it might not be a challenge for them. But I would say for almost 75% of teachers who come from India, communication is one of the areas that they lack in. And what happens is, even though they have an MSc degree with the B.Ed, etc., schools would hesitate to make them the head teachers or the teachers who are actually taking the class, and then make them a TA, which is a teacher assistant, with a very low salary, simply because they cannot communicate in English properly. And that is an important skill and it's an important challenge, because even as parents over here, even parents who are aspiring parents from India or even from other parts of Asia, for example, even though we are an Indian school, I have 17 different nationalities we have in our school. So it's that aspirationally, people who come from non-English speaking backgrounds, or they are not native English speakers, I would love my child to speak good English, and I would love the teacher who is teaching in the class to be able to communicate that kind of what should I say, to communicate in the right manner when she's in the class. And I think that's one of the major challenges that Indian teachers face. Along with the, I should say, the accent from where we come from. We can't help, because we have a very heavy mother tongue, which we speak from the time we are kids. So we speak mother tongue, we speak Hindi or the state language, and then we move to English. So by the time we decode all these languages in our mind, and by the time we come to the fact that there are certain pronunciations that have to be done in a particular manner, the Indian teachers fail over there also. So I think these two aspects, if before they come into the country, if they can take care of in whichever part of the whichever part of India they are, and there are good institutes in India that will help you out with your accent, with your pronunciation, etc. I think it will be a major help for them, especially young teachers, when they enter, instead of them coming here and then going through it and then trying to learn, because then it's an expensive proposition over here.
Great, great. No, very, very helpful, Deepa. Extremely practical and helpful advice. Let me move to Subrat. And Subrat, two things that I'd love for you to give your comments on. One, as an industry leader across multiple sectors in India during your sort of career so far, you have seen global mobility in different professions, and you are also part of a group like Manipal now, which has enabled global mobility for software engineers, for design professionals, for medical professionals, probably different kinds of professionals through your various initiatives as a group. So, would love to hear your thoughts on how do you compare some of that with this whole idea of global mobility for teachers? And related question, yeah, while I sort of know the answer to this one, would love for the audience to hear about what prompted Manipal to partner with CENTA on this initiative, the postgraduate certificate program that we are launching. Would love for you to comment on that as well.
Sure. Thank you, Ramya. I've seen global mobility happen within the technology sector, and then as part of the Manipal group, we have enabled global mobility of doctors, of nurses, and of multiple, technically talented and technically skilled people. Just to give you an example, the CEO of Microsoft Worldwide is a Manipal alumni. And of course, there are a few other data points that pretty much boggle the minds of people. 1 in every 4 doctors in Malaysia is from Manipal University. So we've had a long history of sending skilled professionals from India to different parts of the world. I think the difference between possibly teaching and a lot of other things that we have done and we continue to do is the element of the social skill, which I think the previous participants have spoken about. Because you're not dealing with lines of code, or you're not dealing with things that you can test, you can decode, and you can then rework on it. Teaching is it's a profession that requires you to be there in the class, and to not have multiple opportunities to rework what you've done in that particular session. And therefore, I think that what has been already discussed, that while the technical skills and the subject knowledge of Indian teachers could possibly be counted among the best, there are a whole lot of other things which come in practice in the classroom, which possibly we need to focus on. And it's something that Ramya, the teams have been working in order to put the program together that CENTA and Manipal have come to curate. And we believe that that particular program that we have curated so far would possibly go a long way in addressing this second challenge. In fact, that's the primary challenge that we are trying to focus, because pretty much everyone that we are getting or that we will be training would already be a subject matter expert in their area. Now, why Manipal has come into this, a very short history of the group. This is a group that is, if you go into the group and you meet senior leaders and you meet senior, professionals who've been working in this group for a long time, you only find doctors. They are either doctors in medicine or they are doctors because they have been teaching for a long time. So, when I look at my mailing list, if I start putting DR, it's like 1,000 names in my address book. So we have a history of being in this area and being it's a social enterprise to begin with. The founder of the group, almost 100 years back, started off. He was one of the first persons to actually get a medical degree from this state, and he was one among the 14 children whose father died very early. I mean, it's a very, very inspirational story. And when Mahatma Gandhi died, he was a young man, possibly of about 35 to 40 years old, and he decided that he will solve 2 of India's biggest problems to the extent that he could. One of which is ignorance, and the other one is disease. And that's all we have focused on. Ignorance, and that's why we have built universities all across, and disease, that's why we are one of the largest medical group in the country. And he believed that if you focus on ignorance and disease, you'll solve the third problem of India, which is poverty. That over 70 years, we are still struggling with it, shows you the extent of the problem that India has. But we'll get there. It's something that we will work really hard, and we are working really hard to actually solve for that problem. And just to also give another interesting statistic, Dr. Pai, the founder of the group, actually set up over 150 schools. Almost every single person in western coast of India who possibly has studied in the 1950s and 60s would have studied in one of the Manipal trust run schools. And the group gave away all of those schools back to the government. In fact, Dr. Pai had a very simple philosophy. He would go to a town, he would call some of the people, the town, who were people who were of means in the town, and he would say that if you can put together 100,000 rupees, the trust will bring 200,000 rupees and we'll get a school started. And that's how he started 150 schools, over a period of about 10 years or so. So there is a lot of legacy in why we want to do or what we are doing right now as part of this group. We clearly believe teaching as a profession has both a supply side and a demand side challenge in India. The demand side challenge is clear. There is an absolute dearth of high quality teachers in the volumes that this country needs. And we still have a strong demographic dividend. There are lots of schools which are starting up, and most of education in India at the primary level is being actually supplied by private groups. And therefore, we need school teachers in fairly large volumes. And for reasons that I won't get into, the current curriculum which the University Grants Commission and the regulator runs, that curriculum needs a significant update. And while we are waiting to have that updated, we think that it is important individual groups like CENTA can supplement that that level of expertise, or that they can bring that kind of content which enables the teachers to get better. We clearly saw this as an area which we can bring some of our capabilities together in terms of putting together content, getting the right digital platform, helping teachers with international placements and so on and so forth. And that's how we have decided to partner with CENTA. There are two programs. There is a teacher program and there is a school leadership program. The details of this program are there on centa.org website, and we will continue to add or take as many questions on the details of the program as we go along. But for us, both from a demand and a supply perspective, this is a large opportunity, both within and outside India. And as we kind of discussed, in the post-COVID world, you might possibly be sitting in India and be a globally mobile teacher, at least for some time in future. As Lenin once said, there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks in which decades happen. And we've gone through a few weeks of that kind. So who knows, where the world will be. But it's clear that if you have strong technical skills, which you supplement with strong social skills, you are possibly on your path to being a good teacher.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Subrat. So firstly, yes, it's always an inspiring story to hear about the Manipal group. And I should say that, we as CENTA are incredibly honored and privileged that we are in a partnership with the group. So thank you for that. And we have a couple of audience questions, but before I come to those, I just want to make a quick announcement that my colleagues will be posting a link for a quick survey, a survey poll on how you are thinking about an international teaching career. And so please, it's a single question survey. Please go and answer it. And my colleagues also want me to announce that for those of you who need a participation record of this session, your answer will serve to get you that record as well, as an acknowledgement of having attended in case you need it for your school. So with that, before we, so there are a couple of questions from Purnima and others about non-teachers entering teaching. But before we come to that, a few very quick practical questions on this mobility thing. So, so what are the salary levels like in reality for Indian teachers, both in UAE and UK? Even if those are the two geographies that we might sort of by and large know about on this call. And I'm talking about right now entry to mid-level teachers. So not school leaders, not senior teachers, but entry to mid-level teachers. What are the salary levels like? And maybe would ask Deepa and Linda to give us a quick range for UAE. And John, if you might be able to give us a quick range for UK.
I think I can talk about the Indian schools over here, so that then Linda can talk about the British schools, because I'm not very well aware of that. But in terms of the starting salaries, I would say good Indian schools, and most of the Indian schools over here have a good range of a starting salary. In terms of Indian rupees, it would be around 80,000 if you look at the exchange rate being 20 rupees per dirham. So it's like around somewhere for an assistant teacher, something like a 4,000 dirham, which we AED, which we pay for teacher assistants at the entry level. And there are some schools which will go up till almost 8,000 or 10,000 dirhams for teachers. I'm talking about teaching level, mid-school teachers, middle school teachers. And if they have a coordinator position, etc., then it might be a little over 10,000 dirhams. So anything from 3,500 to 4,000 dirhams to 10,000 dirhams is what teacher would expect. An average rate salary, if I would say, is around 6,000 dirhams. So when a teacher puts in this, and she has a little bit of experience, say over 3 years or 5 years in the teaching and learning, or in the area what she wants to get into over here, I think safely to say that even if she asks for 6,000 dirhams or 7,000 dirhams, it's perfectly all right. So I think that is the kind of this. I mean, most Indian schools it is that way. It would differ in certain, like for example, Dubai. I have seen even in terms of Indian schools, I do not know about the international curriculum, but Dubai pays better than Abu Dhabi or Sharjah in terms of even for the teachers. So the same job, if you have like a primary teacher in Dubai as against a primary teacher in Sharjah or in Abu Dhabi, the salary structures will differ because the cost of living differs in these places. So every emirate will have their own this, but by and large, I think there is, if you compare it with an Indian, I mean, what an Indian teacher gets, then it looks like a lot of money. But one word of caution over here is that the cost of living in an expat country for an expat is expensive. So even if the accommodation, so most of the schools will give teachers shared accommodation or single accommodation, and the transport or the travel from the accommodation to the school is normally always free. Everything else the teachers have to do for themselves. So there's a cost for everything which is involved over here. So therefore they have to understand that even if the pay looks very lucrative, there would be a component which you would need to keep aside in terms of spending that much money to be there or live in the country like UAE. I think Linda can also give about the international curriculum.
Yeah, so Deepa, what I heard from you, just to recap, is you're talking about starting levels of around 4,000 dirhams, going up to maybe 10, 12 at the coordinator level, with accommodation and day-to-day movement to and from the school, largely taken care of by most of the schools. Linda, do you want to add to that? And particularly with respect to what you see for Indian teachers, because I mean, in an international environment, there are real differences in terms of where the teacher is coming from. But in terms of what you see for Indian teachers, if you want to just add to that, Linda.
Yeah, sure. I mean, very much what Deepa has said would be my understanding and experience of teachers' salaries within Indian curriculum schools, there tends to be a correlation between the fee parents are paying and the salaries of teachers within schools. And but for example, in English curriculum schools or British curriculum schools, a lot of mid-market fee-paying schools are British curriculum, and significant percentages of staff are Indian teachers. And you can secure a salary between, as Deepa said, between 4,000 and up to 11,000 dirhams. And that would be dependent on level of seniority and taking on some responsibility. You could possibly sort of pitch in at 6,000 from the start within a British curriculum school. The more you can show international qualification, the more likelihood you're able to secure some more monies. And also when we can talk about this in a bit perhaps, but the career trajectory, you know, there is a need for good quality teachers in the UAE, and there's a need for good quality Indian teachers. And there is an opportunity to grow your career, to become like Deepa, you know, a principal, and your sphere of influence be very great, and then to return to your homeland and be able to do something really good there on the back of that experience. That's ultimately what we want to do, is to share that expertise for the good of everybody. Deepa's right, it's expensive. You know, to buy is expensive, but it doesn't mean to say you have to spend all your money on those obvious things. There's ways of living really in an enjoyable way without, you know, splashing out all your money on all sorts of things. And there's ways in which you can live comfortably and have travel sort of catered for. And I have to say, the UAE is a very, very safe place. I've been living as a you know, a single woman effectively for 6 years in India, in UAE, and it's been the safest I've ever felt in my life. You also, and I find this both within the Indian curriculum schools, but also some of our schools in the UAE tend to be large schools as well. But there is a beautiful, and often amongst the Indian community, a wonderful family sort of environment and feeling of supporting one another. You'll never feel alone. And so that there is the money's there, but actually as a growing professional, to pitch in for an international career, you're looking at the longer term, not the short term, in growing and developing and influencing and being able to make a difference. And value isn't just about the money, although that is important. We, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we need to feel we've got tummy in our belly, a roof over our head, and so on. But
Sure.
entering sort of the international domain as a teacher opens up so many opportunities, and you become transformed. The way you see the world, and afterwards sort of act in that and behave is changed for good, for the better.
Sure.
You know.
Sure. No, very helpful. And John, any quick comment on salary levels in UK, including for Indian teachers? And with that, I also want to move to the next question, which has come up quite a bit from the audience, which is there an age preference? So would schools in international environments, and not just UAE, UK, but multiple international environments that you are all familiar with, would they prefer younger teachers? Is there value to experience or not really? So would love to just hear about that as well from any of you.
Okay, so first thing to say, it's a long time since I've been on a panel where Lenin has been quoted to capture the moment in the world that we live in. So thank you, Subrat, for that. That was really, really, really telling. And also, thanks to the internet, I've been able to check salary levels in the UK. So if you are a teacher and your qualifications are recognised and you start at in a school as an ordinary classroom teacher and you're not working in London, where there's additional payments made, then your starting salary, and this is in sterling, will be just over £24,000 a year.
Which is about £2,000 a month, which at current conversion is about 1.8 lakh rupees.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. I did have a look at what the conversion was, but I didn't want to quote it in rupees in case I got it wrong. And then it will obviously go up depending on promotion, depending on career development, depending on, as Linda said, and Deepa will recognise this, what other skills or qualities you bring that are recognised. These are pay scales that relate to the public schools. If you work in the private schools, the different pay rates will be applicable. And we're also talking about qualified teachers. There is a separate pay scale for unqualified teachers. My expectation would be if you were moving from India into the UK and you were looking for a job, you would be coming as a qualified teacher for the reasons that we were talking about earlier, about the movement of labour, and that would be my expectation.
And a related question, rather the next question on experience level. Do any of you have a comment on is experience an advantage, disadvantage, neither?
An experience is an advantage in terms of what level you might come in at in terms of remuneration. However, I think there's some really exciting scope for our novice teachers in India to enter the profession and grow and develop within the UAE context. And just as John mentioned, within the UK, there's a salary scale for qualified and unqualified. That is the case too for the UAE. And you can actually secure almost like an apprenticeship, and it's the model that TELLAL Institute adopts, an apprenticeship model of teacher training, whereby you can secure a salaried post and be training to become a teacher as long as you're registered with an approved teacher training provider within the UAE context. And you know, there's a lot to be said for breaking out early into the international arena rather than waiting later on. So it and of course it's fitness for purpose. If I'm a principal, if I were Deepa, there'll be some, like any healthy community, you want a range, you know, some experienced, some novice, some more early career, mid-career. A balance is a really good thing. But you know, going back to those soft skills which Subrat was talking about, or those personal skills and qualities, they are really, really important too. How you come across in terms of your passion, what you feel is distinctive about you and what you're bringing to the school or to the children you're going to be working with, your enthusiasm, your love of learning yourself, your interests that you can draw on that can infuse the school and the wider school community are all very, very important.
Sure. And assuming that somebody doesn't hold a B.Ed from India, which is another stream of questions that I'm seeing. By the way, great attendance for today's webinar, and so we clearly have a star panel here. So another stream of questions on if somebody doesn't hold a B.Ed, is either an aspiring teacher or a professional from another domain, and let's say goes through a program, for example, as an example, the Manipal Academy CENTA program, and then wants to apply abroad. Would there be local entities, I mean, like TELLAL maybe, which could allow the person to go through local qualification?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know, Ramya, TELLAL has, we have a strategic partnership, and with your partnership with Subrat and the university, my understanding is that level of certification is a really good one that would serve very well people then wanting to transit over to Dubai, for example, and certainly we could look at how people could then move into a qualifying for the UAE context teacher, or certainly Dubai, TELLAL's apprenticeship in teaching practice, which is internationally benchmarked, and it is a graduate qualification, meaning that everybody would need that first degree in the first instance, but certainly working with training that had been engaged with in situ in India to then move into a recognised qualification with the UAE, that's very, very possible. And on a salaried basis, and on a salaried basis too. So,
and is IELTS a prerequisite if somebody has cleared a good language test? Is IELTS necessary in UAE, UK?
There is a demand, as has been mentioned already, for a requirement that there's a good standard of English language proficiency. There's been a holding off on saying there must be IELTS level 5 or 6 or 7, because quite honestly, if they were to be so emphatic about a level of 6, say, then there'd be a lot of teachers who weren't meeting that within the UAE context.
Sure.
But certainly 5 and above. Deepa, you might want to sort of say something on this, but and it's something that they are going to be, the authorities, coming more seriously in terms of what's expected and as a gateway criteria. Yeah.
Sure. Just before you come in, Deepa, just a quick time check. Would everyone have another 10 minutes to continue and wrap up the session, since we are almost finishing the hour? Okay,
Yes.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Deepa, sorry, please.
Okay, to come back to the IELTS requirement, it is not a mandate over here as yet. Though there is another level of KHDA or the MOE teacher competency which is coming up, or teacher accreditation which is taken on by the Ministry of Education in UAE. Though they have not, it's on since the past 2 years, but they have not made any mandates. But if that comes in, then probably IELTS will become a mandate for every teacher, whether they are teaching in an Indian school or in an international curriculum. Having said that, when they are entering into the international arena, it would be good for them to do the IELTS or take the IELTS in India itself. Let me tell you, it's less expensive in India. It's more expensive over here in terms of money. So it's a good, especially I have seen many schools over here, when they ask for teachers, then they ask for an IELTS qualification or an IELTS test score. It might not be, like I said, a mandate, but it's preferable. It is one of those things which comes under, preferable to have kind of thing. So if teachers are really keen on an international career, I would suggest take the IELTS and come in. TOEFL is also there, but IELTS scores are more, most of the British curriculum schools also will look at the IELTS score and probably, place you accordingly. As far as the BEd requirement is concerned, when you come to an Indian school, BEd is a requirement, even if the school is an international school. So we do require the teachers to be a BEd. But supposing if they come with the experience and they have a graduation or a post-graduation in that subject, and then they have come to UAE and then probably got into an institute like TELLAL or somebody and taken an apprentice teacher training, then that is also considered. But then they should have had some kind of teaching experience back home in India or previous experience in order for them to qualify to be, recruited over here, especially in an Indian school. In an international school, I have seen that most international schools will not have BEd as a mandate, because they have their own teaching qualifications sometimes, or they ask the teachers to go in for some certification courses, etc., to make up for a lack of a bachelor's degree in education. But for teachers who are young and who are freshers, it would be a good idea to spend a year or two in India and complete their training in education and then move on to an international career, because it's going to be very, very helpful for them. And then take on the other, courses like CENTA or TELLAL or, additional certification courses, which will definitely definitely help them or enrich their CVs. And I think that's important. As far as the older teachers are concerned, there is a gap in terms of demand and supply when it comes to middle and senior school over here. So even though you have a lot of teachers coming from India, but if I'm looking for, say, an English teacher who has a postgraduate in English and a B.Ed and has teaching experience, it's really, really difficult. It's like finding looking for a needle in a haystack kind of thing, because there are certain competencies that are required over here and which we need, which is lacking. So in terms of that, I might even look at a teacher who is a bit experienced, has got 15 years or 20 years back in India, and then move, probably in their late 30s or early 40s and all, it is okay. But for all other purposes, like for KG as well as for primary and up to middle school, I should say, up to grade 6 and 7, the teachers that come in, it's a good thing to have teachers who are young, and because of the requirement of the job and the level of participation that is required, especially in KG and primary teaching, learning. And I think that's where your experience would come in. With middle, senior, and high school, probably the more experience the better. But for the lower, it is for the lower grades, I think it would be good to have a bit of even if the teachers are freshers, it is okay.
Sure, sure. And though, Deepa, just one small point on the B.Ed point that you mentioned, which I guess some of the schools in UAE like yours insist on it for teachers coming from India. But I think we've also experienced situations where, for example, there have been a few teachers with CENTA micro credentials who have been placed in UAE through TELLAL qualifications
Yeah.
without a B.Ed. And I, in fact, remember TELLAL preferring some of the non-B.Ed teachers as well at that time, given the competencies they were bringing. So it looks like there are a couple of different routes possible if there is an institute like TELLAL locally, which is partnering on something like this.
Yes, I think that is
well,
true.
For example, it's very possible for CENTA and Manipal with TELLAL pipelining teachers into Deepa's school. They would have gone. You don't mind that, Deepa?
Yes, I'll.
But you'd get what you would get is a really good joined up thinking around need and support, and allowing people to engage with some really good quality on the ground training at home, and then be coming over to the UAE with that support framework and joined up sort of thinking about development. That's the kind of thing we need more and more of.
Yeah.
Sure.
So yeah. Ramya, to just add on to what Linda is saying is that though it is a requirement in terms of a mandate from the CBSE also. So most Indian curriculums which follow the CBSE, especially in high school and middle school, will require a B.Ed qualification. But when it comes to primary, okay, there is a bit of a flexibility that we have in terms of even if they have a TELLAL apprentice training certification or a CENTA certification, if the teacher possesses soft skills or competencies that are working for me, I think I would go and I would look at the graduation subject that she has done. So if she's a math graduate or she's a science graduate or an English graduate at the BA level or the postgraduate level, I think I'd go for it. I would be more inclined to take a teacher without B.Ed who shows me competencies and skills that are required for the job, rather than stick on and make B.Ed as that mandate that I will not take you if you don't have a B.Ed kind of thing. So that kind of flexibility is there in schools over here. So and it works well then.
Yeah, and I want to bring in Subrat here. So Linda and Deepa and John have, both directly and indirectly spoken about different competencies which are required, to work in an international environment. And in that context, Subrat, you had talked a little bit about this when you spoke earlier. But do you want to give a little more flavor of how the Manipal CENTA program is looking to address some of these competencies, and I'll be glad to add to that as well. But you also bring the perspective of how Manipal Group is looking at this in various professions. So if you want to just start on that.
Right. So, so there are two programs. There is a teacher program and there is a school leadership program. These programs are online, so professionals, working professionals, can easily, partake in these programs by spending time over the weekend. So we'll have the classes over the weekend. Uh, the way Manipal Group looks at any area of expertise is we bring in someone who understands the subject matter really well. In this case, CENTA, who really has done pioneering work in India around understanding what teachers should be doing in terms of their competencies. So we bring them their subject matter expertise. We have a platform. The platform is a learning management system. It has student lifecycle management. We can do remote proctored exams on the platform. You can have community boards, discussion boards, so on and so forth. So what the platform creates is a virtual classroom environment, which engenders a sense of learning from one another and that feeling of being part of a community. And then we also support all of this with our outreach programs to the community in terms of more number of people coming in, participating in this, tying up along with CENTA with schools so that we can actually provide career assistance services within India, outside India. And of course, the Manipal Academy of Higher Education, which is one among the very few institutions of eminence in the country. And this is something that is very important to appreciate. When the government of India decided on identifying institutions of eminence, there were only two private sector universities or private universities that were chosen in the first round. One of them was Manipal Academy of Higher Education, which is the body that is going to give the certificate for this particular program. And the other one was BITS Pilani. And the other four, public or government-sponsored institutions were the IITs and IISc, the Indian Institute of Science. So that's the body that will actually give you the certificate. In terms of the content of the program, of course, Ramya, you can speak about that. But, since I quoted Lenin, let me balance things out a little bit. Aristotle mentioned that teaching is the highest form of understanding. I think that's what we possibly want to do, as part of what we want to do in this program, that, you understand yourself, you understand your subject really well, and you understand how students want to really learn a subject. And that only can happen if you truly understand the subject as well as how the student looks at a particular concept. So really, that's what we want to do. So it's an interesting thing, in terms of creating a program that teaches teachers. It's a meta level program in that sense.
Mm. Yeah, no, and maybe just to add a few quick points to that one, since a lot of people have asked about the program. So the postgraduate certificate program that is focused on teaching for the future, which is what it's called specifically, it builds a range of practical skills in teachers in a virtual environment, as Subrat said. So whether it is a skill of planning lessons in a manner that every child in the classroom can be involved, planning student assessments in a manner that you can get real insights from those assessments, managing the classroom itself for children of different age groups, different grade levels, different cultural backgrounds, and so on, and a range of reflective practices as a practitioner, which I think both Linda and Deepa spoke about. So those are the kinds of things the program focuses on, and I think you can look up more details about the program itself. We are also doing 3 specializations in the program. One is on international careers, and that's the reason for getting some of the experts in this panel to talk about what an international career can look like. And interestingly, to Deepa's point, the international career specialization is also going to look at accents as one of the very practical things that Indian teachers might need as support. The second specialization is actually on online teaching, and the third one is on the IB and Cambridge curriculum. So these are elective specializations that people can choose after going through the main as one of the courses in the program. And with that, my last question to the panel, and I know we are completely over time, but my last question to the panel, in the COVID and post-COVID era, and maybe John, you want to start over here, but in the COVID and post-COVID era, do you see the possibility of someone teaching online from India in an international environment? And in UK, for example, I hear about these extremely high-end schools which tend to offer subjects that might be relevant for even just like one student. So an Indian student who wants to learn Hindi sitting in London, and the school therefore wants to get a teacher. Is there a possibility of someone teaching online, either in that or mainstream courses? Love to get a quick view before we wrap up today.
Okay, very quick view, 2 points. I think COVID changes everything. I think it creates a space for those of us working globally and in the profession who want to promote change along the lines that Deepa's talked about, Subrat's talked about, and the way Linda's talked about it. I think in the UK, the space is there for that kind of innovation, but it's narrow, because I think people are essentially wanting to go back to how things were, but actually that's going to be really hard. I think the technological changes that have been needed have exposed those universities and those schools who are not ready, and it's allowed those organisations, those universities, those schools are ready to shine. And some schools are already talking about changing the way they do things permanently. And in that context, online learning as part of what the offer is for some students who have particular specialist needs would make sense. So I think I could imagine it, because I think if we don't imagine it, then actually we don't embrace the possibility of changing things for the better.
Well, thank you very much. I think that's a very helpful as well as inspiring thought. So unless anyone has something to add to that, we will probably wrap up the session now. Yeah. Okay, I'll take that as a yes. And a big thank you. I'm seeing lots and lots of people saying that this was a wonderful session, and I just want to say that we are very privileged to have this group of not just professionals we collaborate with, but many of you now over time friends whom we work together with. So thank you very much for being with us today, Deepa, Linda, John, Subrat, and many of you on the chat. You also seem to have many international experiences, and you have been answering some of the questions yourself. So please feel free to start a discussion thread on my CENTA discussion forum on international careers, and discuss. So whoever's interested, please feel free to do that. There are many people on the chat who seem to be quite experienced as well. So thank you very much, panelists, and really appreciate your taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Should we sign off?
Yeah. I think Karthik will sign off.